Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. It's my pleasure to participate for the first time in this debate and looking at part 2 of the Taxation Annual Rates and Budget Measures Bill. Mr Chairman, there are a couple of points that I want to make, but with reference to the member who's just resumed his seat and some of the National Party members opposite who spoke in yesterday's debate, can I just remind them that the 9 years of the Labour government were spent in improving New Zealand's export opportunities. What do they call the China Free Trade Agreement? What do they call the China Free Trade Agreement, which, although some members opposite wish to contest it, was signed by the Honourable Phil Goff as Minister of Trade and has resulted in its first year, no thanks to this government, but resulted in its first year in a 62% increase in dairy exports alone, not to mention forestry as well. So that member opposite needs to get some facts straight about who laid the groundwork for growth, because this budget, Mr Chairman, goes in exactly the opposite direction. This is a stifling budget. This is a stifling budget that does not promote growth. Mr Chairman, the members opposite had 9 long years, as they like to say, but 9 long years in opposition to come up with a plan, for economic growth, to come up with a plan and some ideas, some new, fresh ideas about how to pull this country out of the financial crisis and into growth and recovery. And what do we get? We get the same tired old recipe that we got in the 1990s. We get asset sales and tax cuts. Now, they did the tax cuts, and now they're promising to do the asset sales in this budget. In this budget and in this part of the bill that is under consideration at the moment, Mr Chairperson, we have the technical bits about cutting KiwiSaver and cutting Working for Families. Mr Chair, in 2008, John Key went around this country saying to the people of New Zealand, you like KiwiSaver? We'll keep KiwiSaver. You like Working for Families? We'll keep Working for Families. You like New Zealand Super? We'll keep New Zealand Super. And what did they do? From day one, began to gut all 3 of those great innovations of the previous Labour government. The talk about needing to change our culture to a savings culture with this bill in front of us is simply that, it's talk. The cuts to KiwiSaver provide disincentives for people to join, disincentives for people to continue their savings. They do not create the kinds of growth and savings that are required if we are to have the investment in jobs and the investment in people that is sorely needed for the productive economy in New Zealand. Mr Chair, I want to go to something that is to do with the context in which this bill is set. In one of the documents we were issued yesterday, the one that contains the speech of the Minister of Finance, towards the back of it, there are assumptions that underpin the Finance Minister's speech and this budget, and they include upside and downside scenarios. And I'd like to accentuate the positive and talk about the upside scenario, but draw to this House's attention how deeply, deeply flawed the upside scenario is. And if the upside scenario is flawed, Mr Chairman, what hope is there for anything good to be done by this government for our economy? The upside scenario says, Mr Chair, that it incorporates a stronger economic recovery led by domestic drivers, with commodity exporters anticipating permanently higher returns and households more confident in house price rises. It goes on to say, at the same time, house prices are slightly stronger, growing 5% by mid-2012 rather than 1.8% in the main forecasts. Higher house prices in the near term reflect current low interest rates and developing housing. Mr. Chair.
I'm going to give the member another call, but I just want to make a comment. Look, part 2 is about working for families and KiwiSaver. And each member's just got a little bit broader and a little bit broader and a little bit broader. And while it's very interesting, some of it has not got a lot to do, and this is general. I'm not directing these specifically at the member who was making the speech, although she is perpetrating as much as some other members have. So I just caution the House, I think the debate should be crisply around that. Make your comparisons, but the issue is working for families and KiwiSaver. Marianne Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I intend absolutely to abide by your advice. The point about referring to this upside scenario is that it is to do with household income. And working for families and KiwiSaver are directly related to household income. And let me just make the point. It says in this upside scenario, how higher house prices in the near term reflect current low interest rates and developing housing shortages, lifting household wealth. Now, excuse me, does anybody else hear echoes of a couple of old names like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac? Does anybody else hear echoes of the 2000s when household wealth was predicated on high value of houses, which in turn produced its own credit bubble, which was the precipitator of the global financial crisis? Mr. Chair, my point is, if this is the upside scenario, God protect us from the downside one, because this is back to the future. And the way it relates to this bill, Mr. Chair, is that household income has been dependent upon, for many people, and I think of many families in the Nelson electorate, has been dependent upon the supplement of working for families. And when that is eroded, household income is eroded, the chance to buy their first home is whittled away even further and escapes further from the grasp of first home owners. And what we have is a budget and a tax bill that is predicated on scenarios that are just not sustainable. The other thing I want to say, Mr. Chairman, about working for families and KiwiSaver is that the cuts to the public sector that are represented in the budget by KiwiSaver contributions having to be found out of baseline in the public service represent and will for the foreseeable future no wage increase in the public sector. That goes to household income. Mr. Chair, not only will there be a reduction in household income because the state sector bosses will have to find the KiwiSaver contribution from baseline and make the $630-odd million worth of savings, but there will also be cuts to services in order to find the other 320 or 330, whatever it is, $1 million that make up the nearly $1 billion worth of cuts. This is where the KiwiSaver changes absolutely impact on household income, because there will have to be trade-offs for no wage increases. If those savings are going to be extracted, or one might say extorted, from the public sector, then that is going to make a dramatic impact on what families can earn and can expect to earn in the near future. So this is a budget, and this bill is a bill which cuts at the heart of how people in New Zealand make ends meet. It cuts to the heart of family budgets. It cuts to the heart of services that families might legitimately expect in a country such as ours. And one cannot pretend by any stretch of the imagination that this budget and this bill represents a plan for growth or a plan for recovery. This is the same old tired stuff that the National Party trawled out in the 1990s. It is doctored up because there are some better programs in place now than there were in the 1990s. But it is the same tired, old, failed policies. These cuts will not produce growth. These cuts will not do what that member opposite said was one of the aims, to stimulate the productive economy. Limiting KiwiSaver does not incentivise people to save, does not provide us with the capital market and the investment potential that we so need in this country to put into our productive enterprises. This is a cutting budget. It is not a plan for growth, and any plan for growth has completely escaped this government.